Thank you all for joining us. This is the fourth event in the CryptoXAI mini conference series. We have 5 presenters for you today, and the format today is each presenter has 10 minutes to give their talk. Then I have 5 minutes for questions. And then at the end, we have an open Q&A session where anyone can come on stage or ask a question. So it's been a couple of minutes, so maybe now's a good time for me to give a quick introduction to Valory, what we're all about, what we're doing, what the point of this event is. So who is Valory? What are we here for? Valory's mission is to enable communities, companies, countries to co-own AI. We do that through our novel tech stack, use multi-agent systems and consensus system, and we've already seen great use cases of that. To that end, we created OLIS, which is crypto's ocean of services. These are live use cases that you can play with today. These include things like Contribute, and we also have a live hackathon that's running right now, so I'll tell you about both of those. Contribute is OLIS's community co-owned AI app. It autonomously rewards tweets, so by being a service user, you can be rewarded for spreading the message about OLIS, and it all happens completely autonomously. In the hackathon, you only need 5 XDAI and 15 minutes. You can take part in the Agent Predictions Hackathon, which is AI-powered agents that run on Autonomous through the hackathon and predict current events and pay out rewards to agents that make correct predictions. Let me just quickly provide a link to one of my speakers. But I'll tell you, a little bit more about the hackathon. The hackathon actually has produced over half of all safe transactions on Gnosis Chain in September. So clearly, OLIS can bring a swarm of AI agents as daily active users to a chain or an ecosystem. So you can find both of these opportunities if you want to play with OLIS, and information on the token and developer rewards at olis.network, which is OLAS.network. Yeah, so that's who we are. The reason that we've put together these events is to hopefully build better connections between people who are working at the cutting edge of AI and crypto. There's a lot going on right now, and it's not always easy to find the latest presenters or people who know the most. And this event has been a really great way for us to elevate maybe voices that you haven't heard before, including some of our speakers today, who I think you're really going to enjoy if our previous events are anything to go by. Okay, so let's bring up our first speaker. Our first speaker is Niklas Rindtorff. Niklas is joining us from, I'm not sure today, so let's bring him up and he can tell me.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Niklas.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me. I'm dialing in from Berlin, so not, I think, too far from at least where some action is happening this week.
Okay, so do you have any slides you want to share today? I can put them up on the layout for you. And as always, if you want to ask questions, we'll have 5 minutes at the end of Niklas's talk. You can ask them in the chat and I will read them out. I'll also try to put them up on screen if they aren't too long, and so they'll fit.
All right, there we go.
All right, take it away.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you everybody for having me. And I'm Niklas. I'm a founder of LabDAO, and we're really interested in making computational biology applications more accessible and more reproducible. I'm a physician by training and a computational biologist, and really my story, how I entered this space about 2 years ago, was I was working in the US and during COVID had to go back and was wondering, well, is there a way for scientists to work across borders because all they need is their laptop? Why is there no way for scientists to work together fully online, and why are there no scientific organizations that are just online chat groups? And out of that idea, we started LabDAO, and what we've been working on here is the Lab Exchange, which is an ability for scientists to run highly reproducible computational biology and biomachine learning applications. One thing that we've been really focusing on was to solve the problem of how can scientists, but also anybody that creates valuable insight using machine learning tools, how can they keep track of the work that they've done, especially when they have an underlying or fundamental idea of that they actually want to share it with other people. So things like, obviously, generative art NFTs, I guess, are one case study that's very popular, where you have someone who uses a tool and that wants to then, however, share it while retaining some reference to their creation. But also in computational biology and biomachine learning in particular, you have the same dilemma where ideally I want to share what I created, and I want to also make sure that the tool is accessible for others but I want to create a reference that I was in fact the creator. And so we've been working on is, we call them records. And records are an NFT that allows you to point to data and compute over that data. And I'm going to just go into a bit more of the details of that in just a moment. If you want to use records today, there's a Python library that we're maintaining, and also the Go client is completely open source, so you can take a look and even happy to contribute a tool or to the code base itself. You can run this from a Google Colab, for example, and basically execute arbitrary containers on the Bacalhau network and mint references of your computation. I'm going to go into some of the technical details just now. Given this is a Web3 AI conference, I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about the larger scale implications for science, but really just dive into how does it currently work and what can you do at the intersection of the two spaces. So under the hood, we basically have three technologies that we're building on top of. At the base layer, every information that you process on our exchange is persisted through IPFS. So IPFS is just a sharing platform that's peer-to-peer, but we do persist information using either Filecoin deals, or you can also just use conventional cloud storage to pin data on IPFS. On the compute layer, we're using a method that sort of just joined alpha, I think, in sort of fall last year. So about a year ago, the Bacalhau team, sort of within Protocol Labs, published a peer-to-peer container inference system. And I'm not exactly sure how many other projects in this space are interested in this platform, but I could definitely recommend more and more founders, if you haven't looked into this, to take a look. What Bacalhau now enables you is to run arbitrary containers and also WebAssembly binaries over data on IPFS. So the input is on IPFS and your output is on IPFS as well. You can run arbitrary sort of numbers of compute nodes, and just like with IPFS, compute nodes peer with each other using libp2p. So it's an overall relatively anti-fragile system. And on the top layer, it's what we're running is a relatively simple, NFT contract that allows users of the platform to persist their creation and make sure that they're recognized for the work that they've done and have certain data ownership rights that come with the work. We believe this is particularly useful for scientists that are working completely sort of in the public domain and do a data that's fully open source. But we also have designed this in a way that you could run this sort of in private environments as well. So you could have, for example, corporations between individual agents that want to, however, keep their cooperation private, set up their own peer-to-peer file sharing and compute system in which they run this protocol. The way that we, think, I think artificial intelligence and Web3 come together is when we think about making sure that creations that are done using machine learning tools are well auditable. And the reason why I'm really interested is because in medicine, you would like to really understand why a decision-making algorithm came to a given conclusion. So you want to register that, and you want to be able to revisit that, you want to be able to rerun it. And in order to create applications that are highly reproducible, we need to design certain tool manifests or models of what goes into a computation, and how do we make sure that only the right stuff goes into a computation. And this is probably a concept that some of you, especially when you're coming from an AI background, have sort of stumbled over. Sort of classic example out of a category theory textbook, where if you want to have something that is compositional, so you can build it together like Lego blocks, and people plug one tool into the next, or what you want to make sure that only the right stuff is entered into your tool, you can apply some typing on the inputs. You have a step of computational steps in the middle, and you apply some typing on your outputs. And we're applying the same paradigm to the way that our platform is handling data. So, for example, if you use an artificial intelligence sort of powered model, these are diffusion models to try to predict how a small molecule interacts with a protein. It's a very common problem in drug discovery. you want to know that only proteins and small molecules enter this tool. You want to understand exactly what happened. You want to be able to rerun it. And then you want to have also a very typed output. And this is exactly what we're doing. So when we actually look at some of our token metadata, we do in fact have exactly this sort of computational graph as the output, where we see on the side here our inputs. So these are, for example, here again, 2 data files that go into this computation. We then have a reference to the tool itself. This is over here. And then we have the outputs. Now, how are tools defined on this platform, right? How is actually the compute defined? The way that we specify tools is using a dialect of the common workflow language. So there are there's a multitude of domain-specific languages to run containers and control the inputs and outputs of computational workloads. The common workflow language is one of them, and it's a pretty sort of established standard in the bioinformatics community. That's where it originated. But what's really nice about it is just plain JSON or YAML. So you're not sort of thinking about Apache Airflow or any other sort of more involved workflow orchestration system, when really all you want is like to run 1 or 2 containers on this distributed system. And the other nice thing is that because it's JSON, it plays really well with sort of NFT metadata and just the whole IPFS, IPLD stack. Now, this was a sort of very technical introduction. I hope that it sort of was appropriate to the context of this conference. I'm going to just close off with like a couple vignettes of what can you do and what we are already doing and what we'd like to do in the future. So we're using these tools right now with nonprofits, but also for-profit companies to like basically run pilots and test the usability of it all. So one pilot here is with a company that's designing protein binders. So we generate new proteins that have the property of binding very tightly to cancer targets. This is basically a generative model problem. So you have a target structure, for example, here, this blue protein over here, and you want to generate a couple of 3D structures that bind to this target really tightly. And this is what certain diffusion models are capable of, but you need to run this at scale. So you need to, for example, in this particular case, design about 300,000 of these proteins in order to actually find in the lab 1 to 10 that really work. So we're really interested in not only using these sort of peer-to-peer powered computing protocols to track everything that is going on, but also to, like, for example, distribute some of the workload to community members that donate some of their infrastructure to this overall effort. There are some other projects that we've been doing that go into the very same direction. And I'm just going to go and sort of finish the conversation and at least my contribution before we go into questions to answer the questions like, what can you do today? Now, what you can do today is you can head to try.lab.xyz and you can run a notebook. You can basically, in the notebook, send off a compute job. And basically, it's a containerized protein folding model. And what you get back is to your wallet a record of you running that tool. So all your inputs are persisted. The tool container information is persisted, as well as the actual output is referenced in your wallet, with all the data being on IPFS and the computation happening on this distributed compute platform. You would be in very good company if you did this. So we launched this about 30 days ago on Optimism testnet. We have about 200 records that have been minted. We really want to get this number up and create just undeniable utility for the people that work with this platform. So if you give it a try and you find it useful, or you have a project that has sort of a related sort of set of requirements, then I would love to pick up the conversation. And with that, I think I'm just going to stop here. Check out our docs. They're pretty up to date. There's as I said, try.lab.xyz is sort of a bit of a shortcut. And I look forward to any other questions that you might have.
Cool. Okay, so we have about 1 minute until our next speaker. So if you can stick around for the open session at the end, I definitely have a question I'd like to ask. And if you'd like to ask Niklas a question, please put it in the chat now, and we can return to it in a second. But Niklas, I wanted to thank you for that. It's really, really cool. I'm glad to see Web3 getting applied to like the hard sciences. It's really, really quite exciting.
Thank you, Thomas, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to take Niklas down. I'm going to bring up Dr. Fahd Khan. Dr. Fahd is joining us, or Dr. Khan is joining us from the HBL Center for Blockchain and Applied Research today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much. So if you can see my screen, I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Fahd Khan. I'm right now in Pakistan. I am the principal investigator and director of HBL Center for Blockchain and Applied Research in university here. HBL is basically Habib Bank, which is the largest bank of the country and one of the largest in Asia as well. And while preparing these slides, I was wondering if I would get very academic. I'll try to not be and try to show results. So basically, I was one problem that we see very common is about the applications of AI in cybersecurity, which is a very critical aspect of for every financial institution. And the distributed nature can basically, blockchain can be incorporated into it to make it more credible. And so that's why I started working on distributed AI with a bunch of collaborators. And I'll start with what we have done and the results, which are quite encouraging. Now, in principle, I would start with the basics. There are two basic concepts. One is about federated learning, which is basically used to train machine learning algorithms by using multiple data sets, which means that every node connected to a centralized server gets to keep its data, and they don't exchange that data. That means that any institution who do not want to share it don't need to, but they can basically train their models locally in their within their institution, and then just share the weights of that machine learning model. And an aggregator, centralized aggregator, basically makes the averages of all those weights and then sends it back to every node to further improve. So, and distributed AI, on the other hand, actually focuses on distributing the architecture for training machine learning models, but data basically is usually centralized. So the advantages of federated learning is basically you get to train machine learning models without actually sharing the data, which is great privacy, because that's of great importance for many of the institutions who do not want to share their data with others, as opposed to AI, which is using centralized data, and the communication between the nodes or the servers that are basically training those models is quite frequent, which increases the bandwidth. Now, we first use distributed CNN, which is convolution neural network. This is just the traditional. Typically, the traditional CNNs are distributed onto different nodes, and there is a centralized server from where they collect the data, train their models. But the training model itself is basically distributed into smaller, into different nodes. The computation itself, which improves reduces the training and inference time, which is a good plus, and it can handle large data sets. We run multiple nodes of this training script, and the average gradient amongst the different nodes is then shared amongst others. Now, this is there were a few problems with the distributed artificial intelligence algorithms, in the sense that there's no data privacy. There has to be a centralized server where you have to access. And this is much of a problem for the large institutions. There are scalability issues, there are infrastructure complexity, because the nodes are communicating quite frequently. The cost goes up. So we compared that with federated learning, which allows multiple institutions to collaborate without actually sharing their data, which ensures their privacy. And centralization in general is slow. So these individual corporations or institutions can use their own underutilized resources or servers, and just share the weights of their learning with other institutions. Now, there are learning. Usually the clients, let's imagine there are 3 hospitals, and each hospital has the same different customers, different patients, but the same kind of age or same kind of problems or ailments. In vertical federated learning, actually it's different institutions, more like a bank and a retail store, where the same person could go to a bank but would be asking for a loan, as opposed to when the same person goes to a something. So you can have different kinds of data about the same people in vertical federated learning. In horizontal learning, you can have the same kind of features. So it depends on the application. We use it for in malware detection in distributed environments. So malware is basically any software that can damage or gain access to a computer system. And this work of our used the traditional malware detection faces a lot of challenges in its efficiency and scalability. Now, I won't go into the what we did, but we used different data sets to basically make grayscale images of different types of malwares that can exist, and then capture its attributes and some kinds of features that can be used to identify malware. Now, in distributed CNN, the weights are updated through a back propagation. I don't want to go into a lot of technical details, but these gradients are updated on a centralized sort of CNN model. The thing I think the audience would love to know is what were the results of distributing these convolution neural networks. And as you can see in the slide, the centralized CNN model had an accuracy of 85% and a training time of almost more than an hour. But as you can see, as we increase the number of nodes from 2 nodes to 4 nodes to 6 nodes, that means that the computational part is being distributed into 6 different nodes or 4 different nodes. You can see that as we increase the number of nodes, we increase the accuracy of finding that malware, and the training time required for training these distributed convolutional neural network models goes down quite a bit. Now, we did this for actually tumor detection in brains as well. I'll go straight on to the results that if there's a centralized learning platform, it usually had an accuracy of 37%. But if we use federated learning, in which again the data is stored locally and the models are trained locally, but the gradients are shared amongst the different participants or nodes, we had a higher accuracy and a less time per epoch during the training time required for each batch to go back and forth for a model to be trained. So the point I'm trying to make here in this slide and the last slide about the results was that we have an advantage using distributed AI infrastructure. So I think I'm running short of time. So I did another work for smart contract vulnerability as well using AI. This was very centralized, but there are a lot of vulnerabilities that exist in smart contracts, like reentrancy, integer overflow, underflow, etc. Now we use the BERT model and the CNN models to basically identify these vulnerabilities, and the results were quite impressive in the sense that we had an accuracy of 92.7% to actually accurately identify a certain vulnerability. Now, in a nutshell, this is the last slide, so I think I've got a minute left. In principle, AI is going in the next 7 years is going to grow anywhere from 1 trillion to 4 trillion, depending on the source you use. Cybersecurity itself is about $500 billion worth of potential in the next 7 years by 2030, and blockchain will have potential of almost more than $3 trillion. So if you combine all these 3 areas, basically it's at the nexus of combining 3 quite important areas into one subset. What I have not done yet is basically use this neural net, this distributed AI ecosystem, which we know is more efficient, requires less training time, and integrate into a blockchain architecture, which would allow basically incentivizing of different of different nodes to basically share data or use their computing power, and allow end users such as businesses and companies to use that technology to secure their systems. Because blockchain in itself can have a lot of advantages in terms of automation, in terms of data integrity, etc. So I think I'll probably end here. About what we have done. In a nutshell, we have been able to see that distributed AI is advantageous as compared to centralized AI systems. The distributed nature can have more integrity if we incorporate blockchain into it. This would allow incentivization as well. And hopefully in future, we're going to continue doing this work and build a blockchain platform around this decentralized AI infrastructure for identification of malicious actors and ensuring that cybersecurity is improved for any business or a company. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Khan. It's really great. And you got through quite a bit of material. We have a couple of minutes for questions. So if somebody wants to write a question, you can put it into the chat. I will read it out and also put it on screen. But while we wait for that, I wonder if you could maybe tell me, if you were to have an ideal collaborator, let's say a blockchain or a crypto project that has this token layer that could provide more of an incentive through their tokenomics, like what would you need from them, and what are you looking for? What works best with what you've already developed?
Yeah, so actually, it's the only step required is basically building that setup. What I am certain about is that a distributed AI is performing better than centralized AI systems. Cybersecurity is going to be a huge buzzword in the next few years. It already is. It's going to be a huge market. So essentially, it's just being able to put in a team of more dedicated resource and put them at task to build that infrastructure. I think essentially that's the only thing that remains to be done.
Awesome. Okay, I have a question from one of our other presenters today. Pavel asks, what vulnerabilities have you discovered with AI?
Yeah, so basically what we worked on during smart contract vulnerability, there are almost 29 different vulnerabilities that can be identified, but the majority of them, or a bulk of them, are basically can be classified into 7 distinct vulnerabilities that exist in a certain smart contract. Those are reentrancy problems, there are timestamp problems, there are underflow, integer overflow, underflow problems. So there were about 7 that we could identify. It's not as if we were finding a new vulnerability. It was just that we knew what the vulnerabilities are, and if it exists within a smart contract, we have a very high percentage of accuracy with which we can determine that this particular vulnerability exists, or this particular malware exists in a particular software or particular smart contract.
Cool. Good answer. See if anyone else wants to put a question in the chat. If not, so you mentioned 2 different use cases for the work that you've been doing recently, which was slices of brains and assessing whether you saw like tumor risk, and then smart contract vulnerabilities. Could you maybe make a prediction of like what might you work on next? Is it related or something completely different?
Well, actually, so the application is quite different. One is health related, the other is vulnerability related, but in principle the technology or the intellectual property that is being developed to kind of identify them has a lot of commonalities. And the thing that I'm most interested in is to basically take that work and integrate blockchain into it, so that we can have automation, we can have data integrity, and we can incentivize and tokenize, integrate and incorporate tokenization into it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I've got about a minute left. So yeah, I will thank you very much for your time. I hope you can stick around for our open Q&A session at the end. If not, yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'll take you down and introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Okay, so next I have Pavel Fedotov, who is joining us from Well, he's the co-founder of Algo AMM, and his project that I think he'll be speaking about today is a different one. And so I will let him tell you all about it because I don't remember the name. How's it going, Pavel?
Yep. Hello. I'm just like I just had like difficulty with internet connection, so I probably missed something that you said. Just about now. Yeah, and like I'm really afraid that my internet connection might break for some reason. So yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. Well, just go ahead and keep on going. And if it becomes quite unstable, I'll let you know probably via Telegram because that's probably maybe a little bit more reliable. But yeah, maybe you can introduce yourself and
definitely. But like I'm just curious, like what project did you mention? Because like I've heard like you probably said something about me. I'm just like really curious because like I have multiple ideas and I'm just like I'm struggling to keep up.
I believe the one that I mentioned was your work on Algo AMM.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Did you want to put up some slides for your presentation? If you do, hit present, and I can add them to the layout, and I'll step down and let you take it away.
I hope it works, honestly.
Yeah. Well, we'll do our best. Okay, I'm going to add that to the stage and step down. If you need me, just let me know, and I'll hop back up.
Oh, it works. So it works, right? The presentation, right?
Yeah, you're all good.
Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah. So. Okay, so I'm presenting, I guess. Yeah, so the topic of the presentation is essentially AI and prediction markets. And I'll just like quickly introduce myself. I'm like a full stack blockchain engineer. I've graduated from University of Manchester in economics. I've worked with data scientists in Bitcoin DAO and Nielsen IQ, which is like I think Fortune 500. Like retail analytics company, and I've completed grant from Fahd Khan. We won bounties from Uniswap, Near, UMA, etc. Right, and this project got developer DAO fellowship with Prestar Capital, and I think there were like 15 probably grantees. Yeah, so the prediction markets are known as information markets or like idea futures. These are mechanisms that allow individuals to trade in predictions or judgments on the future outcomes of events. These markets often involve the exchange of cryptocurrencies or other assets based on the likelihood of a particular event occurring. Prediction markets can be used for a variety of purposes, including forecasting election outcomes. So, for example, forecasting the next election, something like Trump, DeSantis, and Biden, right? Or predicting stock prices. And we can even drive social engagement with prediction markets. They're often seen as a way to aggregate or utilize collective knowledge and expertise to make more accurate predictions than would be possible through individual forecasting. And in particular, I believe that quantified forecasting is an underused tool that can help make better decisions in uncertain and complex worlds. So data, blockchain, and prediction markets, I think, are really connected between one another, and prediction markets can act as an unbiased source of real-time information. So that would be something really similar to an on-chain, off-chain oracle, right? And we can combine prediction markets with OpenAI. We can combine it with optimistic oracles, UMA, for example, right? We can combine it with decentralized social protocols such as Vance, and with a simple oracle as Chainlink. Yeah, so there are definitely more interesting things that we can say about prediction markets, and probably the most interesting, maybe not ethical, is the speculative opportunities. And prediction markets enable participants to speculate on the outcomes of various events, as we said, right? And it can also act as performance. Like we can essentially judge a DAO or a person on their performance using prediction markets. And they can also act as financial instruments, but there are like constraints with the regulation. And essentially, this introduces an element of risk and rewards, which allows individuals to potentially profit from their accurate predictions. So prediction markets are also provide market efficiency and make markets more efficient from economic perspective, right? In making actually participants free to buy and sell shares based on their expectations of future events. And the prices essentially reflect prediction markets. The prices of shares in the prediction market reflect the collective wisdom and beliefs of participants. And this creates opportunities for investors to identify mispriced shares and achieve financial gains. So, there are also other things that we should mention, which is market liquidity, which enables participants to enter or exit positions based on changing circumstances or new information. Which ties directly to risk mitigation. And this enables essentially risk management. In blockchain, this could enable something like derivatives or complex swap mechanisms available in traditional market but not on chain. And this is the most interesting part, is there is a huge potential for innovation. And this ties directly to zero knowledge proofs with machine learning. And this is probably deserves another presentation on its own, but I'll try to make it like a quick summary. And I think zero knowledge proofs can lift barriers by performing computations off-chain and providing a proof that this computation was correctly executed while shielding private data. The proof can then be verified on-chain for a much smaller computational cost, enabling us to implement on-chain private machine learning. And I think there is a very, very popular example of on-chain trading bot, which is like a Rocky bot, I think. Then we can also use the ZKML for anomaly and fraud detection. So for example, we can train on smart contract data to enable to automate security procedures such as pausing contracts in a more proactive, preventative way. And finally, I think with generic cash, the ZK probably has a really bad reputation right now, and we could definitely use ZKML to improve the to seem it more ethical for users to actually to essentially to increase the to improve the image of blockchain and ZK, right? With actually complying with the regulation directly with that ZKML. So now we actually move to what I'm building with AlgoMM. And the problem that we've outlined is that prediction markets suffer from fragmentation with liquidity dispersed across multiple platforms, and this resulting in a lack of convenient one-stop shop. So in short, we see fragmented landscape and no centralized hub. And we aim to bridge the gap by integrating prediction market platforms across multiple chains, by aggregating liquidity across very, very similar questions, right, or pools, and just bridging them. And just like a quick recap, we think that AMM, which is an innovative solution, is better than a traditional order book for prediction markets for these reasons, is that it creates actually a robust platform, which enables seamless access to a wide range of prediction opportunities in one place. It actually provides market depth and liquidity. And we're definitely looking for beta testers. we're definitely looking for beta testers, and we're building the application. Like we built the first version of AlgoMM on actually on Algorand, but there have been multiple difficulties with actually obtaining users, and we are moving this platform to EVM, and we are looking for like grant opportunities to essentially, to provide a better experience for our users. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I definitely have more to say, but like I'm probably boring you all. So yeah.
Cool. Well, you're doing great on time. You got about 5 minutes for questions. So maybe I'll ask one while we wait for it. See if anyone has any text questions. If you have a question that you'd like to write, please put it into the chat. I will put it up on screen and read it out loud. But maybe you could tell me about combining similar questions and maybe like using an LLM to do that, because some questions can be very, very similar in the prediction that they're making, but the wording could be different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There actually, I've noticed there are multiple difficulties with this, and that's primarily because the multiple. Oh my god, I use the same words. I'm like, oh my god, I'm using the same words. Why? Sorry. Yeah, so there are like multiple difficulties. One of them is actually there are multiple resolution mechanisms. So, for example, one protocol might use like a custom proprietary solution to be like, well, this event resolved as a yes. And another protocol might see the same thing, but resolve it as a no. And that's because they have proprietary oracles. And I'm trying to make it more open source and more fair to the essentially to the end user by making it more transparent. And I think like UMA in the sense is probably the solution, because they have a resolution mechanism, so that the community can actually dispute the outcome. Yeah.
Right, cool. Andrew Penland asks if we can see the opportunities slide again. So let me pull that up.
I'm trying to remember where the slide was. Sorry. I don't think I actually have this slide.
Maybe Andrew will let us know which one he meant. It could be, I think I saw one maybe before this. That might have been the one he meant. This one, maybe?
Maybe I can like share the slides, I guess.
We'll see if he lets us know some clarification, but I think it could be that one. Yeah, that's great. If you want to drop the link in the chat so anyone can check out your slides on their own. Let's see, I've got a message here. I will share this. Okay, the last one is the one that he'd like to see. I believe that's the one with your links, ways to get involved, right?
I'm sorry, I'm just too anxious to be honest.
No problem, you're doing great,
like,
man, really.
Honestly, I have a huge script. I'm just like, oh my god, I don't know where I'm actually at.
Okay, so I just dropped the link to your slide deck, but if you could maybe pull up your very last slide with your links to where you're looking for beta testers, and maybe people can write that down on their own.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm off the tab somewhere. That I'm like, I don't know where it is.
Oh yeah, so let's algoamm.com, and the Twitter username is algoamm. And the Calendly link, that's a very hard word to say, Calendly, is /PFEDPROG. And I will also type that in the chat right now. Okay, so we've got about a minute left. So I think that's probably not enough time for questions, but I want to thank you for presenting. It's really cool. I hope you get your beta test. I hope you get a grant, because I'd love to see prediction markets consolidate a little bit and be a little bit more easy to use, because yeah, as you kind of intimated in your presentation, the potential is huge, but there is quite a bit of fragmentation, and you never know when, for example, Predictit will take all of their predictions offline, and then I believe recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, suddenly they're back, but in the time that happened, like all these other ones sprung up, and yeah, it would be great to see a little bit more consolidation. So I hope you get there. Well, thank you very much, Pavel.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I just had to say this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great to have you. Okay, so I'll take you down. And if you can stick around for the open Q&A session at the end, that would be great. So I'm going to switch to the break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But for now, I will bring up our next speaker, who is Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick is joining us from, he is the CEO. Sorry, I'm reading off my notes. Dr. Nick is the CEO of Factory Desk. So let me bring him up and make sure he gets his full 5 minutes. How's it going?
I'm great. Thank you, mate.
I'm going to give you 10 minutes, not 5.
Right,
yeah, maybe you want to drop a quick introduction and then we can put some slides up and I'll let you take it away.
Sure, man. So yeah, my name's Nick. I'm the CEO of Factory Labs, and we build DAO infrastructure. So yeah, we're trying to build a framework for human collaboration, and we're building a set of modular dApps and an execution framework that we think will take DAOs into the sort of their next phase.
Killer. Can't wait to hear about it. So I'm going to throw your slides up and I'm going to step down. If you need me, just let me know.
Perfect. Thanks. So yeah, I'll get straight stuck in. I'm going to talk about prediction market DAOs and AI, and what I think is a really interesting concept that's yet to be fully realized, and that is futarchy and how we get there. So for about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a sort of rapid tour of where we're at with these things. So I'm going to start with prediction markets, talk a little bit about collective intelligence. I'm going to show you an example of a prediction market that we've built and how we think we can take that to on-chain reputation, and what DAOs are going to bring to this sort of mix. And finally, now AIs are coming to maturity. How are they going to play into this and take us to some of these really interesting collective intelligence concepts? So prediction markets is something I've been fascinated with for many years. They've been around for quite a long time now. They were first proposed by Robin Hanson about 23 years ago. So this long predates crypto. And they were initially presented as a means to improve decision-making in organizations, which is a little bit different to how we've seen them realized up to this point, which has been largely a kind of betting market type construct. They're originally designed to be a governance idea. And the principle is that, markets being massive open consensus engines, like if you want to know what the world thinks of Bitcoin right now, you just need to look at the price. So markets have this really interesting dynamic of being a consensus system themselves. And the idea of prediction markets is that we can build market dynamics into a means of aggregating information and what people's perceptions are on things. So prediction markets are a way to basically hone in attention through incentives on particular issues and get people to put skin in the game, put a market price on what they think is going to happen. This kind of touches on what I think is certainly one of the things that brought me into the DAO space. I was a learning theorist for many years as an academic. And collective intelligence is this idea that if we can somehow find mechanisms for aggregating massive diverse ideas and thoughts, it's potentially better than what is possible with an individual mind, or even through what you could do in a company, for example. So collective intelligence is basically an emergent property of social complex systems. It's always there, but it's not all that useful all the time. I often say crowds aren't wise, but there is collective intelligence in them. And it's a fascinating subject that cuts across social cognition theory, mechanism design, this idea of wisdom of the crowd, swarm intelligence, and ultimately democracy and social consensus systems. So what is futarchy and why is it interesting? So this is when prediction markets connect to this idea of governance. Can we make better decisions if we integrate markets into our processes, into the way that we make decisions, given that they can aggregate this massive amount of collective intelligence? And the paper that Robin Hanson wrote was vote on values and bet on beliefs. So this is the idea that we can generate our values through kind of democratic means. And then when it comes to should we make these decisions, they go to a market and we see what
the market thinks is a good idea or is the best idea. What I find really interesting about this is it kind of unifies moral and social consensus of democratic systems with the efficiency and informational accuracy of a market system. So it kind of brings humanity back to the markets in a very real way. Now, these are things that were really, like, they're in the Ethereum white paper. They were very much part of the early Ethereum law, Gnosis, Augur, first dApps on the Ethereum mainnet near enough. But it's incredibly difficult. And since then, we've not really realized them. So what are the limitations? Well, it kind of assumes that the people with the most money have to make the best decisions, which we know isn't always the case. We've basically had one real prediction market in 20 years, and that was the 2020 Trump-Biden election. And it was amazing. It actually really outperformed the statisticians and the people commenting on the elections. But the issue was they're quite rare that they bootstrap enough liquidity to get real market consensus. So the order book model really doesn't work because you can set a market up for any idea. So if any idea can be a market, then everyone sets up different ideas and it fractures liquidity. That plus real regulatory uncertainty around these things, moral hazards, people worry about things like assassination markets and various other things that these could potentially be used for. And they're difficult, confusing, and overtly plutocratic. So I'm going to sort of quickly present our take on this. It's debatably a prediction market. We call it a crypto economic game. It's called finance.vote. And instead of taking binary decisions, typically a prediction market is this event going to happen, yes or no? We give a bunch of realities, essentially. In this case, we give people a basket of market assets, and we allow people to quadratically vote on them, essentially ordering a list of what they think is going to happen. And we use soulbound tokens as identities. And basically the history of people's predictions gets attested to their identity. And you get this perfectly on-chain history of how an identity has performed over time. Now, we don't use a centralized order book. We're much more like Uniswap, where we have an AMM type thing, where we use a pari-mutuel pool. And we use a network token to provide liquidity. So there's always a bet to be taken, and you're not waiting for a counterparty. So we've been running this for quite some time, and we've got some really interesting data that not many people have seen yet. But interestingly, and this hints to the crowds aren't necessarily wise thing, but there is market alpha in this system. If you put $100 each into our 10 market assets, you would have hit one of these lower lines where you basically hit market beta. The market went up about 3x in that time. But if you voted or if you bet, if sort of went all in on the least voted for and the least predicted item, you would have 10x'd your portfolio. So actually there is signal in this, but it's essentially you're counter trading the people in there to get it. So where do DAOs come into this thing? And this is where I'm sort of really interested in this. So DAOs now, they're very early. Most DAOs that we sometimes call DAOs aren't actually DAOs, which kind of gives the overall sort of idea a sort of bad name. But ultimately, they live in a kind of trilemma between decentralization, autonomy, and organization. And that sort of means that, if you aren't decentralized, you're not really a DAO. So where I think this goes is that we get towards on-chain reputation. So we can take the history of predictions, assign them to a digital identity, and then assign reputation factors to these things and amplify the predictive power of those with a history of good prediction history. So that's what I think will create these cybernetic feedback loops, where we can essentially amplify the signal in the collective intelligence. And I think this might be where we discover on-chain meritocracy. So where do DAOs come in? Well, DAOs basically need to manage some of these games. There's prediction equilibria. So we found an equilibria where essentially counter trading generates market alpha. That might be temporary. So it needs to be a dynamic equilibrium. and we're going to need to amplify different voices at different times, and DAOs, I think, will be ideal for that. And ultimately, this is where we start to unify the governance space to generate futarchy. So DAOs essentially are social consensus systems, and this is where we will vote on our values to decide what we want to take to a prediction. And ultimately, we can use DAOs as an oracle itself to move away from market prices to basically anything. I think AI is potentially the missing piece. This plot on the right here is essentially the mind of a DAO. So this is using our app Influence and the Factory DAO suite, which is essentially these nodes are identities and ideas or values. And this generates what I call an opinion graph. And this is basically the mind of a DAO. And this is perfect information for fine-tuning AIs, which is what we're doing at the moment. And essentially, this will allow us to tease out the collective intelligence from the crowd by tuning reputation factors and giving attention to the best predictors. So yes, I think this puts us on the road to futarchy. We're moving into a space where we've got maturing reputation-based prediction markets. So Finance.vote is a reputation-based prediction market rather than an entirely plutocratic system that allows us to dial up and dial down particular voices in the prediction. And really the best agents to be able to make those judgments will be AIs. They'll be able to synthesize the sort of massive amounts of data and all the complexity in the system, and it is a complex adaptive system. And AIs will be able to essentially adjust reputations dynamically. And essentially, governance is going to connect with prediction markets, which is where we're going to in the next year. And I think we'll get AI representatives where we'll be able to input, say, the mind of 1,000 people into a data set and generate an AI representative that genuinely represents those people. And NFT governance is the way to do it. In that sense, you'll be able to have an NFT or an SBT and alter people's power and influence in a DAO purely through an on-chain meritocracy mechanism. And ultimately, I think we end up with a kind of human-machine hybrid collective intelligence, which could get us looking into the future, but ultimately, I think will generate us entirely new forms of governance, which could have serious impact in the real world. So yeah, these are the apps that we are using to do this with. We've built a suite of applications that we think are what DAOs need to be able to do these kind of new and elaborate governance mechanisms. And yeah, you can contact me on Telegram at @DrNickA or follow Factory DAO at FactDAO or Finance.vote on X, as it's now called. And that's it from me.
This is great. This is really fascinating stuff. We'll take some questions, but I've left your slides up because I would like to ask if you can maybe go to that graph that you showed us and maybe point out some of the like interesting inflection points where the two like counter predicting started to diverge.
This one. So so basically what this is, we've got a basket of assets, which are essentially, they were a basket of DeFi assets at the time. So things like YFI, Maker token. And essentially what we've got here is a weighted consensus. So essentially the DAO or the predictors are weighting this basket of tokens every day. And essentially what you've got at the bottom here is essentially just a random walk. So if you just do pure randomness, you sort of lose money. The further up this you get, you're weighting into the prediction. And actually the way to make the most money is to pick the absolute bottom asset that everyone listed to. So all-in pessimist is putting all your money into the least voted asset each week for a year. And that generated you 10x alpha on your initial portfolio.
That is really fascinating. Yeah, if anyone wants to ask a question in the chat, please write it down. I'll read it out loud and also put it on screen. We have about a minute, so maybe something I'm curious if you see a future for is like AI delegation, like where I'm specifically saying I think you touched on this a little bit, but yeah, I'd just like to hear like how you arrived at that idea, because it's something that we at Valory used as a proof of concept. And so I think we have some alignment there.
Nice. Yeah, so I absolutely believe like governance apathy is a huge problem in the DAO space. It's unreasonable to expect people to constantly be tuned in to DAO governance behavior. So yeah, we're trying to essentially generate this opinion graph, which is essentially again generated from mixed methods data, qualitative and quantitative data from our voting system. And yeah, we think this can, via a LoRa type fine-tuning mechanism, can generate, say, a chatbot that could write proposals on behalf of the DAO. It literally synthesizes the attitudes and opinions and preferences of everyone. And ultimately, this will move to a kind of executive kind of agent that simply says, I think you'll want this. And people say no if they don't. And if they do, it just the proposals just start sailing through. So yeah, we're doing this with actual political data next year, and we're going to run a sort of political experiment with Londoners to sort of capture what they think the issues around the London mayoral election. But yeah, ultimately, I think DAO agents, DAO representatives is probably where the DAO space is going to go.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're right on with that. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have time to stick around for our open QA, because I do have a great question from Andrew, which I don't have time to because it's time to bring up our next presenter. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Be there.
Cool. Okay, cool. So next I have for you Rahul Nandakumar. Rahul is joining us from diplomat.xyz, and I'm very looking forward to this as a community manager myself. So I'll bring him up now. How's it going, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Do you want to throw some slides up?
Sure.
Cool.
Just give me a sec.
Yeah, no problem. Hit present, and sharing your screen is usually the easiest way.
So first off, thank you guys so much for having me. AI and DAOs is just a topic that I care so much about. I really think that AIs are going to improve the operations of DAOs. They're going to make DAOs more accessible for everybody. And as somebody who's been in the DAO space for close to 3 years now, I think we have a lot of things that need to be solved. And AI, it just seems like AI can be applied to so many of the issues that we faced 3 years ago, we're still facing today. Okay. When I first laid hands on ChatGPT, I had spent 2 years in tens of DAOs and 3 years as a business student, and I had the startling realization that I had just found the solution to both of those things. You see, back when I joined Kernel, Cabin DAO, and Friends with Benefits in 2021, I didn't really have the time or resources to participate alongside my busy schedule as a student, but I was obsessively attracted to the concept of the ownership economy, where I'd have the opportunity to meaningfully control the protocols that I used. But with time, I grew anxious about how true it was. When I got my ENS airdropped to me, I sold because I was skeptical I'd gain more value from delegating to a stranger than selling. And in the bear market today, these problems are more potent than ever. Voter apathy, centralized delegations, and stagnating growth are drawing DAOs further from the organizations I was passionate about in 2021. But in January, I saw GPT-4 and saw a glimmer of hope. Algorithms that my friends and I trusted to consistently suggest valuable content and solutions to their problems. Instantly, I knew that the answer to maybe all of the big issues in DAOs and maybe humanity lay somewhere in AI. But to solve the problem, I had to define what a DAO was. So in June, I wrote an essay that sought to define a community from first principles. Today, I'll be making some revisions, but the overall gist is the same. Now, having a model is incredibly important because we use the word community a lot in crypto. We have the crypto community, DeFi community, ReFi community, so on. But this distinction of how communities are uniquely structured from a cooperative or a company is unclear to most people and makes it much harder to separate healthy communities from unhealthy communities, grifters from meaningful communities, and explain how we actually innovate to skeptics so that they can even contribute meaningfully to communities like ours. So the issues with DAOs, right? Like we take a look at DAOs, and primarily the problems are in friction, and then apathy, then churn, then identity crisis. We'll come back to this. The model that I created was one that took owners and consumers and workers, these three general archetypes about what people want from crypto. So owners, they want control over governance over a protocol. They own tokens, and they want to like have a sense over how they want to be able to control the protocols that they're using. Consumers, these are people that want to behave, they want to participate in transactional sort of things. So they want to buy, they want to sell. And then workers, they want to produce. So they want to, they may have a job, they may work in crypto. And by mixing these kinds of three archetypes, you can create a cooperative, a community, or a cult. And the way that I think about this is that so we've seen cults, we've seen cooperatives in the past, but what DAOs uniquely enable are for communities to self-organize. So, but at the same time, these tier 2 sort of groups inherit the motivations from both the base of the collectives, but they struggle with the archetype at the opposite end. So communities are always going to struggle with having people to work for them. And I think we're seeing this across tons of DAOs where you have paid contributors that are also like governing the community. And this creates a lot of tension where they're making decisions that are suboptimal. But if they do successfully cross this barrier without bleeding into the other side, right? So if you do have like a community that is governing the protocol without also like being the contributors to the protocol themselves, then through this communication, you can create a very healthy community, you can create a very healthy community. So if they succeed, they form what's called an institution. And these are the most powerful, most storied organizations of all. I think Apple and Tesla as cults. So they've crossed the owner to cult barrier. WJA as cooperatives, and like Ukraine DAO as a community that successfully raised capital and then allocated it through workers that were on the ground in Ukraine and were successful. So ultimately, like this is sort of the basis for where I think DAOs are going to be. We're going to have community DAOs, we're going to have company DAOs, we're going to have cults, we're going to have all these kinds of different independent organizations. But what's uniquely enabled are the community DAOs, right? But the issue is, of course, that like community DAOs are the hardest to actually mobilize. And we can go over here. And it's because they're very sensitive to friction. You can think of people on social media, right? The most popular social media platforms are the ones that are the most frictionless. So this is TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You log in and it does all the work for you. That's simply not a user experience that we're seeing in DAOs. So what this friction creates is apathy. When people open up Snapshot or Discourse, they feel the friction, and over time, like the problem that I faced, they realize that the trade-off isn't as in their favor as it might have been. So they might feel apathetic, and then the sort of reaction to this from DAOs is to improve, right? And then once they churn, they start going into a little bit of financial incentivization, so airdrops, token incentives. And then when churn has reached a threshold, then they start delegating. And you could sort of see this as reducing friction, but through centralization and through management, which I think is against the ethos of crypto, where everything is about like individual sort of control, right? Like you should be able to control the protocol in the same way anybody else should. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I sort of think of this as like delaying the inevitable unless we solve this friction piece at the very beginning, which is where AI comes in, right? So why AI, right? I think it's pretty simple, right? But number one is going to be modular UX, right? So this is sort of central to the crypto ethos, but when you're able to interchange models for different responsibilities and in order to generate more trust from somebody, this is sort of solving the problem that many people in crypto sort of come to crypto for, which is institutional distrust. So if you can come in here and create your own llama to like fine tune it to the proposals that you're looking at, or if you can just use ChatGPT, if that's like something that you're willing to trust, then the ability to interchange those models allows you to be in control. Second is that trustable, right? So everybody here has used ChatGPT before. Some of us have used GPT-4, but many of my friends are using it like it's Google now. So they used to trust Google, they used to trust Wikipedia. Now we're trusting ChatGPT, even though it's just an LLM. Sometimes it's not even necessarily connected to the internet or like a database, but it's trustable. Now, maybe it's not entirely trustworthy because it has hallucinations, but people are working on that. The third part is speed. So this is more into keeping institutions alive, right? Keeping organizations alive. But you always have this problem of time. The longer it takes for something to get done, the more people are going to be disillusioned with the process. They're going to fall off. They're going to be upset. So we need to create viral loops that increase engagement and retention. That's more of a secondary thing. The real thing is to increase the speed of organizing and agility to compete against other orgs, whether that's other DAOs or even like other non-crypto based organizations. And then 4, it's reliable. So it's always a function call away. You can just query the API and it will always produce results. So versus human delegates, which can be they have other responsibilities, frankly, right? So they may not participate. Many of them, I think, have participation rates below 50%, which is frankly, I think if you're, they have things to do, but I understand that. But if I want to, delegate my tokens to a delegate, I would want them to participate in votes and also, to build a deeper relationship. So, yeah. So at Diplomat, that's what we're focusing on doing. So we're building AI to participate in voting. So our AIs are going to suggest to people, it's going to create these personalized suggestions and based off of like your Ethereum wallet or maybe your Farcaster history or so on. But they're going to participate in the proposal voting process. And we want to bring it to 100% participation rates, 100% approval rates, and 100-second turnover times. So this is like the mix. This is like the holy trinity of what we're trying to accomplish at Diplomat. And it's going to be like 10x, 100x better than what we have right now if we pull it off. But we've currently built out our demo. And here, this is us during build space. But we currently built out our demo. We have several users using our platform. We've done like the tests. We've spoken to customers, and we're just like continuously improving all the time. But where we can improve in governance in the future, this is something that we're building out right now. Where we want to bring this in the future is a place where AI can connect us directly, like a one-to-one in a more meaningful way, and also where you can control it from your mobile app or your web app, but it operates in much of the way like the TikTok algorithm does, which is to say it's invisible and it's something that you can trust because of course you're able to like tweak the parameters on your side, and everybody is able to like participate in the editing of their personal their personal AI delegate, but the underlying like effects or the you're just going to be able to trust the AI to go out there and then vote on your behalf or to suggest you proposals where you can take the decision on your own end. So that's where I see the future of AIs intersecting with DAO governance. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of opportunity here, and we're super excited to be working in this space and to be working alongside like some really incredible people who are also thinking about this. So I would love to chat with you guys. I know we're going to chat right after this, but yeah, thank you so much for listening to my talk, and happy to be working with you guys in the future. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Very cool. I think we're very ideologically aligned on what we would like to see LLMs doing. So I really hope to see where this goes. Now we'll do an open QA session where anyone can join. The first question I will put will be to you, Rahul. And speakers, if you're backstage, I'll assume that you would like to come up. If you don't, just let me know in the private chat and I'll put you down. And we'll also return to some of the questions that were asked, but we didn't get to. I believe we have one. Well, first I'd like to ask Rahul, you mentioned tweaking your own personal algorithm. And I like that you brought up TikTok, because you'll often hear people talk about TikTok. They'll say, my algorithm showed me. So I think people already kind of understand this. As I'm using, maybe your proof of concept doesn't have this quite yet, but maybe you could speculate about, let's say it gives me a proposal and I like a little bit of it, but I feel like it's too vague or it's way too specific about something. What do you envision the tweaking for the tuning? Maybe that's not quite the right word, but giving, on TikTok, people know not to watch something too long and don't touch any of don't touch the screen, because if you even open the comments, it thinks that you like it, right?
Yeah. That's actually really fascinating, the whole game theory part, where it's if you understand the rules of how the AI operates, you're going to change your behaviors because you want it to produce a certain output. When it comes to the way we're implementing our AI solution, it's largely based off of a personal statement that somebody writes up and then adds to the LLM, so that the LLM understands who they are, what their interests are, their values are, and then we're looking into adding some other databases, some other some for example their forecaster that I mentioned. I think ultimately different people are going to go about implementing this in different ways, but the way that we're doing it, it's not really interfacing too much, where the way that you'll tweak it, it's going to update the future proposals, but it's not going to be
right.
Continuous sort of, it's not going to be entirely sort of based within the parameters. It's I think we're going to have to draw on different kinds of data sets in different ways, right? And keep tweaking until we get really well at understanding exactly what customers want. And there are even different kinds of DAO participants, right? So
Absolutely.
whales are going to act differently from retail, and we do want to focus on retail for now, because I think those are the people that have been largely disillusioned with the DAO process. Whales and delegates are going to be they're going to be fine, right? But yeah, that's sort of how we're thinking about things. It's just focusing on the end user.
Cool. Yeah, I love to hear that. I have a written question for Dr. Nick, which we didn't get to. So Andrew wanted to hear a little bit about a counterbalance to positive feedback loops of predictions. He says there's many examples where an expert gradually reaches a point where they start speculating and diverging from their expertise, but their prior reputation overcomes, I believe you mean external doubts about what they're saying, and his example is a great one. The collapsed Tacoma Narrows Bridge was designed by an award-winning architect. So any ways to avoid this?
Yeah, I think pseudo-anonymity essentially is one of the, I'm largely skeptical of these kind of bring your historic credentials and put them on chain. I think that's a terrible thing to do with privacy anyway. You should definitely not dox yourself by attesting your degree certificates to a blockchain, just in case one of the apps you use gets put on some kind of naughty list. And it just generally putting personhood on a blockchain is a bad idea. So really we need systems that decouple from historic reputation and credentials, and what you're judged on is truly what you've done in the history of your decision making. So really you're just a NFT identity. We don't know who you are, what you're doing. You're just purely judged on your predictive power. And yeah, this is where I think the AIs can come in for dialing these reputation factors, because just because I did a PhD in physics 10 years ago, I couldn't, pass a physics test that an undergraduate could now. So it's like credentials are largely meaningless. What matters is what are you doing at that time and your recent history. And I think that's where the sort of AI dynamic weighting can come in to account for these things. So yeah, just don't count on historic credentials is one of the answer to that, I think.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I also agree about being very cautious about what particularly personal information that kind of paints a picture of us we put on chain, because as we all know, it's up there forever. And yeah, I love the example of an app that's like later on the naughty list. Like you'd love to say that you had nothing to do with it because at the time you thought it, but no one's going to believe you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a little bit of time now. So if you guys want to ask each other questions, maybe you heard something in a presentation that you think applies to what you're doing, or just something that you didn't understand, I'll invite you to just unmute yourself, and I'll facilitate as much as I can, but I'll kind of take a step back now. And I'd love to hear what you guys thought of each other's presentations.
Yeah, can I ask the first question, right? To I guess Dr. Nick, because I think I've made some research into OFAC sanctions, right? Because there was one of the bounties to essentially go into the data on hack incidents or something like that, right? And in one of the articles, I've noticed that there are actually people, malicious actors, right, that would send sanction tokens or assets to non-public figures, right? And I'm well, I don't know how the government would actually act in this sense, right? But I think from what I read in the article, it didn't actually kind of cause anything bad to those non-public figures, right? So I'm not really sure if I'm just pushing back on the public attestations, for example. I'm not sure that attestations would actually kind of bring the same difficulties. Yeah.
I think so. The dust attacks that we're talking about after the tornado sent someone sent tornado ETH to the top 100 known crypto personalities. Technically, they have to report that all of their finances to the American government now every year. So they do have I think David Hoffman from Bankless is actually suing the government because he was one of them. And technically, he does have to fill out forms every year, and there was some serious implications for everyone who was dusted on those things, whether everyone complies to it or not. But broadly, yeah, I mean, that's just one example of why people don't largely understand the immutability thing and understand that you're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs from everything that you've ever done. And all you need to do is connect two graphs. You might have a private life over here and a very, very public life over here. And as soon as you send ETH from this graph to this graph, you've linked them, and that can have serious implications. So even when bringing in things like zero knowledge proofs, I absolutely hate WorldCoin, for example. I think it's an absolutely terrible idea. I think attesting your personhood to blockchains is just generally a bad thing to do, which is largely why I think we should be focusing on pseudonymous reputation systems. Quite easy to just import your PhD or whatever into the DAO, but it doesn't actually mean that you're going to be any good for that DAO or perform in that DAO. So keep pseudo-anonymity is really one of the fundamental affordances. And just ultimately, until we get base layer privacy, it's just a bad idea to be doing that. And increasingly, regulations are shifting over time. Things that you might have done 3 years ago on chain might be deemed to be bad now, and so it's just there's some serious implications to it that I think you need to watch out for.
I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about, well, I can tell you a theme of our first crypto AI mini conference was standards. We wanted to start having discussions about how to better work together, because particularly when all of this stuff is so new, and the pace is so quick, you get people working on similar things and maybe diverging when it might be better to converge. So did you hear anything in each other's presentations that you thought maybe you would want to answer the questions about, like, how do we set standards for the kind of future of this intersection of these two industries, which are, one is growing really rapidly with a ton of hype, and the other one is quieter, but also has that same hype cycle in it where, suddenly there are tons of people talking, but not always collaborating in an effective way.
I have some thoughts on that, I guess. This is one of the issues with decentralization, right? Is that everyone essentially running in different directions at all times. And to a certain degree, there is a kind of organic convergence where all of a sudden, we decide a kind of proposal framework, or some powerful actor that aggregates data says we want data in this way. And then people start feeding it into that aggregation space, and then ultimately standards sort of pseudo emerge generally. But I think the way that we could sort of do that is having a kind of meta governance DAO that sort of generates these standard types. So we've been thinking about a kind of reg DAO for self-regulating practices in the space. So what is the best way to launch a token? What is the best practices for, giving governance proposals in DAOs, and, aggregating people from across the space to come and sit in one of these global governance DAOs where we start to thrash these things out. So yes, something like a DAO that sits above all DAOs that people can join into, and we build sort of self-regulatory frameworks is probably one of the ways I could see that converging.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see something like that.
I'm curious in that solution how you're thinking about, I think, all of the operations of that kind of DAO, because I sort of have this core value of, bureaucracy is, less effective than just, I think, leaving this up to a free market or, minimal regulation. So when I hear an overarching DAO to regulate, all the DAOs, right? Like, I think that's frankly, it's probably going to be not as effective as maybe an alternative solution. I'm curious because I also think we haven't, this is so new, applying AI to DAOs is just so new that you also don't want to stifle innovation before we see progress and we see adoption. So yeah, I'm sure there are some places where we could draw inspiration from in order to operate the DAO of DAOs in the proper way. But yeah, how do you sort of think that would operate?
I mean, exactly this kind of conversation is what you'd want there, right? And the kind of alternative is we let nation states do it. And they basically say, put kill switches in your smart contracts, which is something that our, in space, expert driven space wouldn't do, right? Because it compromises the affordances of the technology. So it's the regulation is just everyone, do it this way, right? But ours would maintain autonomy, whereas nation state power enforces you do it that way. And then you're stuck in this international tapestry of different nation states all telling you what to do.
Yeah.
So I think what we're missing is a kind of unified voice for the industry. I spoke to regulators where there's, the oil and gas industry spends hundreds of billions on lobbying. So governments are used to having people badgering them all the time to get what they want, whereas we don't even know what we want. So, it's just, I think we need to just find out what we want first. What are the good practices? And ultimately, it would be only soft power, right? There would be no way for this DAO to, what we do see is these kind of on-chain vigilantes out there who kind of like, go around snooping people, and there's now like Arkham, which is like a snitch marketplace and stuff like that. There's some really toxic ways that thing could go, and is going. I think all I'm interested in seeing is a kind of better counterbalancing force to all of this stuff that currently is a bit of a vacuum. But yeah, similarly, absolutely hate bureaucracy. That's why I'm, build prediction markets to marketize governance, things like that. So, but that kind of attitude is what will inform these things, rather than people who love bureaucracy doing it.
Yeah. I think when I think I also feel like a DAO of all DAOs is subject to the same issues that plague all DAOs, right? So,
of course,
I would love for, I guess this is sort of the subject of the topic of our talk, but like, using AI, right? Make it more accessible to all participants that like use the blockchain, and have them maybe participate through some kind of like AI delegate, just to make it more accessible. But ultimately, like, yeah, if our primary concern is, if our primary concern is government overreach, and if it's to dissuade that from happening, I think like probably like I also wonder, like, just from what you've seen, like I know we like the regulations with Tornado Cash and the way that like people have been subject to sanctions and such. Do we really have no way of stopping that?
I mean, the technology implicitly is permissionless, right? So
yeah,
regardless of where regulations end up, there's nothing stopping anyone from launching a dog coin at any point, regardless of like, if you do it, you're going to go to jail for 1,000 years. It'll still happen, right? The Inu tokens will still be juggled about if crypto's banned by every nation state on the planet, which I don't think happens. So ultimately, these technologies are permissionless systems, and I think there's like an ontological tension between nation state power trying to stop people deploying smart contracts, and the technology itself affording people to be able to do it with whatever happens. But yeah, I mean, like it's all going to be this iterative synthesis. I think there's going to be applications. The way I see it, there's like a fork where there's crypto, which is permissionless, credibly neutral, doesn't compromise. And then Web3 is going to start playing with this, selective gating, letting in some people, jurisdictional nuances to apps and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, and to what you said earlier, I think, AIs could be used to aggregate we've got aggregations like, Deep DAO, for example, kind of aggregates everything. You can see proposals, but we can start to make decisions about how we can do everything better if we get all of the information across all the DAOs and the practices everywhere, synthesizing. At some point, I think we'll start cracking. Like, I loved your model, by the way, in your talk. I think it's really, really sort of nice framework for looking at it. But once we land one of these templates, and it works, then everyone will fork it, right? This is the beauty of these things. We just need to find some of these things that work, and then everyone will start using it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we discover what those things are that work and decide everyone should adopt it or selectively adopt it?
Definitely. I really like the idea of the fork. I'm going to start using that now. It's ours now. I'm going to fork that.
Fork away.
Yeah. Yeah. No other questions for me.
Oh, well, I do have one kind of sort of a facetious, provocative question, but something I've thought of quite a bit about lately is delegating to an AI just another form of like apathy? Like, is the goal just to see actions taking place? But if I think you kind of see what I'm getting at here. Does that question actually matter? Does it actually solve the problem, or are they two like different things? And then related to that, I'm curious how much. Obviously, there's a lot of transparency and openness in crypto, but it's also incredibly opaque in that the sense it's very hard to understand. And even for those of us who touch it every day, it's so easy to make a simple mistake by not reading carefully enough. Do we need to understand how our AIs are delegating for us, like as end users? Like, how important is that? And yeah, and then of course,
Yeah,
is it just another kind of apathy?
for sure. Okay. So our product right now is focused on suggestions, so not the delegation aspect. And the reason why is because I think we're just not at the point yet where people are comfortable like letting it like an AI loose, right? So what we want to do is provide suggestions so that people with jobs, like you don't have like 40 hours to spend every week scrolling through discourse and like reading the Discord and chatting with other people, like we want to allow them to have access. And the best part is that all this information is textual, right? It is essentially what an LLM is built to do, is to compile all this data, or compile all this text data, and then to produce a response. So the way that we're doing this right now is just providing a suggestion, and the person can take action on their own. The threshold that we need to meet in order to cross the sort of gap, in order to go into a place where people feel comfortable to delegate to an AI, I think is the consistency of results. So once we start hitting like 99% approval rates, right? People can like look through the suggestions that they've seen, and they can make the decision for themselves as to like, am I comfortable letting this AI delegate on my behalf, right? If you look at the history of like AI algorithms, if you look at TikTok, that's not a decision you can make, right? Like this, I think this is also really fundamental, like crypto values, like you get to make the decisions. And then the second thing is that, this apathy question, I think by lowering the amount of friction needed to participate in the system, you open up a lot of additional possibilities for like how a retail voter might be able to participate in DAO governance. So maybe that's just like, oh, they're seeing the suggestions aren't as good, so now I can tweak a parameter, right? Which takes like maybe 10 seconds, right? Compared to the hours. Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah, I'll sort of jump in there. I think I'm generally not a huge fan of delegation schemes anyway. I think they're centralizing systems. So you can look at like for Arbitrum DAO, for example, which uses a classic delegation scheme. And, there's, 20 or 30 delegates in there that, you can meet at crypto conferences and DM on Twitter. And, it's easier to capture a DAO of 20 people than it is, 20,000 or whatever. I think we should be generally skeptical of over delegating to AI systems. I think the first iteration is a kind of sense making tool. So what Rahul was saying then is like, what's happening in the DAO this week? I don't want to sit there and spend 20 hours in Discord. What I can get is like a report of what's going on and what everyone's thinking. And then I can talk to the AI and find out, what happened about this, tell me more about this. And that's purely like a sense making system to inform your decision making that you then go and vote. I think that's probably the more ideal one. I think ultimately it will start to move into, I think that you should probably always have a veto for these things. So pure executive AIs, which literally are just making decisions one after the other without any kind of veto stopgap. People are going to do it, but it's probably not going to be a fantastic idea for quite a long time. So yeah, I think we're quite a long way away from truly on-chain AIs. Might even be a bad idea, full stop. Having a kind of, AI with its own treasury and being able to do what it wants might certainly get the AI safety people a little bit hot under the collar. But yeah, I think sense making first before decision, like on-chain decision making, is probably the way to go.
But if you'd like to be a little bit more extreme, I can share a proof of concept that's on the Olus network, which is the DAO that Valory co-created. Governator is an autonomous service where you can delegate to it and you tell it whether you want to be good or evil.
Nice.
It watches the DAO's forum and then uses the OpenAI API to select a voting option based on good or evil. And of course, they chose good or evil to make it a little bit like fun and kind of extreme. But it does actually work, and it runs completely autonomously. And because it's a autonomous-based service, it's completely decentralized. So you can go a little bit extreme. And yeah, I do invite people to check it out because it's quite fun. So that's about all the time I have now. So I want to thank all of you for both your presentations and for sticking around for the open discussion. I will be sharing the entire recording of this talk, or all of the talks and the discussion on YouTube. That usually takes me a little less than a week to get out. So you should be seeing that on the Valory AG feed. I'll take down our presenters, but yeah, I want to thank you once again. And I'll throw up a slide where you can see our YouTube channel and then subscribe, and then you can be the first to know when those recordings are done. But yeah, thanks again, everyone. This is very, very interesting, and I enjoyed all of your presentations.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.